How's it going, Megan?
It's going well. Happy to be here. Good evening, listeners. Happy to have you here as well.
Yes, thanks for tuning in. So tonight's going to be a fun show. We're doing a celebration of writing, both pieces from our own collection and pieces that we've had people give us. Really not much more to say about that. We'll just dive in. It's going to be kind of an eclectic mix tonight. No real theme going on tonight. As I said, just pieces of our own and pieces that people have given us. So do you want to start it, Megan?
I do. And with that, again, listeners, if you have anything you would like to submit, please do reach out to us. We have a Facebook page for Writing on Air. You can also email us at write.onair@gmail.com. And you can also go to the KZFR website as well, and you can get our information from our page there too. But we love to hear from you, love to hear your writing. You could submit anonymously if you don't want your name tied to it. If you want to be known, give us a shout. We would love to promote your work. We are a source for local writers. We want to celebrate everybody's writing. So there's no good, bad, right, wrong. Any source of writing is valid. So please go ahead and send us some of your stuff.
And I haven't said it in a while, so thanks for reminding me. This is why Megan's here, to make this show polished and beautiful. We are the picture frame. You are the picture. So whatever you bring, we're just going to put it in that frame and look at it and talk about it. There's no criticism. It's all a celebration of this art style and this art form. So if you want to be on the show, write.onair@gmail.com, write.onair@gmail.com. And yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open the show with one of my newer poems. The reason I want to go ahead and read a poem here is kind of to give a little story on what we're talking about when we talk about celebrating writing. Both Kevin and I are writers. That's sort of what led us on this path to having this show.
And I don't mean to interrupt. You also have a book coming out, so that information will be coming soon sometime on this show, yeah?
It will, absolutely,
okay.
yes.
Okay.
There's going to be more.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I'll be quiet now.
But yeah, so having this kind of, platform to share writing is really exciting, because I do feel like writing itself, we use, like we've talked about on previous shows, social media all the time. We're constantly, embedded in our phones and in these different forms of symbolism and words. But to really get down to the kind of ancient practice of writing, of journaling, of, exploring our creative side and expressing our feelings. We have this platform here on the radio that reaches out to a bunch of listeners, and then it can be streamed later as well. But it takes a little bit of courage. It does take a little bit of vulnerability, as we've talked about before. But it's so powerful, because even if it just makes a difference in one listener or one reader's life, that poem has moved beyond you. It has reached a purpose that is outside of your own. And that's pretty neat.
Well met.
All right. So this poem is about being kind of an imperfect, vulnerable human. It's called Star Strewn. It's one of my newest poems. I do post regularly on my Facebook and on my blog at redheadwordsmith.blogspot.com. So if you ever want to check out my writing, you can look there, and you can also get some of my books on Amazon. But really, I'm not writing. This is not a self-promotion in any way, shape, or form. I write for a sort of cathartic release, and I write because it makes me feel good. And I write because I love to share, and I love to share with people, hoping that they can relate to. So again, this poem is called Star Strewn. My life is strewn, star-like and infinite, an untidy cluster of dust and light, particles from always and never, remnants of what was and what could be. Somehow, the cage of my spirit is held together, a miraculous mirage of skin and bone made to look like someone, some thing, some, not all, of me. Yet it is both everything and nothing. No thing and everything all at once.
Wow. That is a beautiful cosmic journey right there, encapsulating your essence, I would say.
Well, thank you.
Do you want to elaborate some more on it too?
Sure. So this is the other great thing about celebrating writing, is that I always introduce poems. If I read them, sometimes I read them at open mic. I have gotten better at sharing my poetry, just kind of out to the general audience. When I first started writing, it was a way for me to communicate in metaphor, so I could say things that I needed to release without directly saying them. It was my form of journaling. And it was validated to me by kind of having my thoughts and emotions reflected back to me in a way that I didn't even know could be said that way. And then I learned about myself and my emotions and my feelings. So any kind of, interpretation of this poem that a reader gets, it is valid, it is correct. It is whatever it is to you. In fact, that's where it gets its meaning, is from all of the meanings that it can have. But when people ask me directly, so what does it mean? Of course, I can give you my meaning, and I don't mind doing that. In fact, I have nothing to hide in my poems anymore. My metaphors are for everyone to know. So this poem is essentially about just, I call myself an untidy cluster of dust and light. I mean, we're all made from the same basic particles, the same atoms, and they're not perfect. They're imperfectly put together. But so is the sky, so are stars. When we look up, it's a beautiful thing, and it's totally chaotic, right? And to me, this poem is a celebration of not needing to know who I am entirely, not needing to know exactly what that means, just accepting all of it as it is, and knowing that there's parts that are going to burn bright, parts that are going to burn out, parts that are going to live on forever, and parts that are going to be released and made into something else. All of that is perfect and wonderful to me. And I'm just now at the point in life where I can kind of celebrate that. And that includes my writing. So that's what that poem is about.
I love that end, the last stanza there. Yet it is both everything and nothing. And then, this is the last stanza. No thing and everything all at once. There's emphasis there. She breaks it down into individual words all the way through, which is a really fun play on defining.
Exactly.
And kind of both defining it and also making fun of it, because there really is no way to define what we are in a beautiful, beautiful way. In fact, maybe the definition might even lessen it. So I like how you kept that open-ended at the end there.
Thanks,
That's really
Kevin.
neat.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. I think I'm going to add on to one, because we'll flip-flop back and forth here, because after hearing that one, I think I have one that kind of matches. This one's called Meandering. And from my perspective of writing, I also write in a very cathartic point. For me, it usually comes late at night or early mornings, when I'm oftentimes in nature looking at the stars or just outside, and something hits me and I go, wow. And so this one is called Meandering, because I thought, man, we're kind of just floating through an entire cosmos right now, and we really don't know which way we're going, which I think is electrifying, a little bit disorienting, maybe terrifying, but I find a lot of joy and stability from knowing that we don't know personally. So this one's called Meandering. Falling through time is a perplexing endeavor, adopting observations, like picking up sticks, without consideration, absorbing through trust, passively and without consideration. We expose ourselves to loss, learnable loss, as all is useful for something, but maybe a novel choice is worth considering. That's the end of that one. It's a short one.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't take a lot of words. And I think that's the other really powerful thing about writing is, it's like I do a lot of line work in my drawings. It can just be like one continuous line, but it makes something. Sometimes I think some of the most profound things about life and self-realization, self-actualization can be literally a few words.
Yeah. The beautiful part of writing is you don't need much for this. You don't have to write a novel or multiple books to get meaning out of something. I think in this piece I was talking about towards the end there, learnable loss, all is useful for something, but maybe a novel choice is worth considering. I think that in our meandering, sometimes people get stuck in some areas, and we have to remind ourselves that we are meandering, and we can attribute use to things or we can not attribute use to things. But one way to get out of feeling stuck is to maybe choose something new. So at the end there, I end my poems a lot of times in kind of an open-ended but positive direction. When I go back and reread it, that's where I get my most encouragement to keep writing for myself. So that is more of a note to myself. I ended in if you're feeling like you're meandering, you can choose something different. And always go different directions.
I think it's important to reread works several times. I mean, even my own. I'll go back and read it and be like, wow, that means something totally different than I intended it to mean then, but now it means this. But the other thing is, even if it's just a few lines, a few stanzas, sometimes what you pick up in your mind, what image is created, whether it's the building and constructing that you kind of mentioned that has, you're building this image of building something. You don't need to know what it means. And if it doesn't work out the way that it is intended to, move on. And it reminded me literally of this story from yesterday where my son had a bunch of Lincoln logs out and he kept trying to build this one house with his Lincoln logs. He was dead set on it had to have this many, up for the walls and this many for the door. And it kept falling over and over and over again. And I said, well, you could try to build something else. No, I have to build this one. He eventually got it. And when he was done, he looked at it and said, I actually think it would look better if I did something else. Knocked the whole thing down.
Wow.
And used the pieces to build something else extraordinary without instruction, which was pretty fun.
Yeah. He's a true master of this art, for sure. Wow.
Yes, that kind of reminded me of that.
Well,
He was
thanks.
related to that poem.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good art related story, I think.
So the next poem that I was going to read is actually not my own.
Mm.
This is a poem by my dear friend, Wendy. Wendy is an extremely talented artist. She's a writer as well, though she wouldn't consider herself one. I am declaring her one because she's an excellent writer. She's very insightful.
Good.
But she was so kind that she actually wrote me a poem. And this poem, though she wrote it for me, I think this poem could be applied to any woman. When I read this poem, I feel like it embodies a lot about just feminine energy, about this kind of softer side of vulnerability. And honestly, when she wrote it for me, I'm reading it back and I'm thinking, this could have been something I wrote about you.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So this poem is called Cleopatra. And I'm not going to explain it anymore. I'm just going to read it. And I would like to say this poem is for every woman. Both the poet and the poetry, the artist and the creation, the comedian and the comedy, the musician and the composition. Unpretentious, mysterious, a subtle fire, beautiful, emotional, philosophical, whimsical, honest, playful, witty, captivating, haunting, and inspiring.
Yeah, if she's not calling herself a writer, I mean, I'm going to just add my name to the list there. I think she definitely is hitting something. Wow.
So a little backstory of this poem. I had my phone open. I was cooking in the kitchen and had looked at, the weather outside and a bit of a recipe or whatever, and closed my phone, made sure all the tabs were closed. And I picked up my phone because it had lit up and it was opened to a website page about Cleopatra.
Oh, wow. No kidding?
So immediately I ended up messaging my friend and said, can you explain this? I even looked in my Google history. I hadn't looked it up. I'm not sure how it ended up on the phone. So we had this conversation back and forth, this dialogue about feminine energy and about, the kind of backstory of Cleopatra. And it just sort of led down this path. So then a few nights later, she sent me this poem and I was like, whoa, that's so powerful. So that's kind of a little fun backstory on that one.
That is like, I'm rereading it now on your phone. That is a densely packed, pure positive piece. I almost wanted to cry when I was reading it because that is probably one of the kindest things that you could say about people, anyone. I'm glad she sent it to you. This is so cool. And for those of you who don't know, Cleopatra was a queen, pharaoh in Egypt, am I correct? So someone who would embody the things that we're talking about, which is unpretentious, mysterious, a subtle fire, beautiful, emotional, philosophical, whimsical, honest, playful, witty, captivating, haunting, and inspiring. I don't think I could write something as encouraging and endearing as that.
I certainly never received anything as endearing. Honestly, I thought this is one of the kindest things anybody has ever written to me, no doubt. But what a kind thing to send out into the world in general. And that somebody could, have such insight to just really celebrate a person and celebrate an energy that way, to me is remarkable. And again, it's 2 stanzas.
Yeah.
It's not very long, but life-changing, right? And again, I think that should be dedicated to all women, for sure.
All women, but thanks for sending it to Megan first. I guess I'll tag on the next one.
Yes, please do.
So I had one, I'll keep on the positive note. We'll stick on, I have one that's a little bit less positive, but kind of playful. We'll stick on this positive one. This is called Healing. So in my head, before I wrote this piece, I was at kind of a dark point in my life. I guess not a dark point, but I was having a dark day. And one thing that I had dreamed about, I think a few weeks before, was this idea of what my heaven would look like. So I was kind of playing with that idea of like, what would that look like? And in my head, it came from a darker spot, but I imagined being somehow on the top of a mountain in a very large grassy field on a large, smooth, bare rock. And the time of day in this setting is, I would say, twilight, not morning, not night, kind of in between. You couldn't really tell. You can't see the sun, and just a soft glow of pink rose everywhere. And a very cool, balmy 70, 80 degrees, nothing too much stressful on the body. And I remember just kind of sitting in that headspace. And then I went outside that same night. And as I was sitting on my porch, I went, wow, I'm kind of getting all of the same like sensory images in my mind as I'm sitting here. Am I already here? And so this is what I wrote in thinking that thought. It's called Healing. I had that thought and then I wrote this later that night. Healing. And as I sat in the middle of the softest part of the night, a kitten firmly sleeping on a cool windowsill, the healers emerged from their kilns and began to settle into their craft. As result, a soft night, a chill electric calm, and the beginning of potency. And the beginning of potency is the end there.
So I have to point out that while you were describing what this poem was going to be about, I was thinking, wow, this is another poem that you just wrote while you're describing.
Yeah.
That feeling that you were describing as far as outside the perfect temperature and the perfect light. And then that kind of led into this idea where I already had accepted wherever you're taking me is clearly heaven. And that's amazing that you were able to find it right there in that moment and then have the, ambition to go and write it down so you don't forget.
Yeah. Thanks for that one. That's one I think Megan touched on a good point right there. If you have a thought, a lot of people call it the muse speaking to you. You can call it whatever you'd like. But if you have a thought and it produced some energy or motivation in your head and you went, wow, that's cool, put it down somewhere in concrete because I guarantee you're going to get busy doing something else and forget. And then it won't come back to you or it'll be different and you've missed the moment, I think. It's okay if you miss a moment, there will be more. But if you have that point in time, make use of it. And this was one of those times that I think I'm glad I made use of it. Because when I reread this, for me, it is a healing piece. It makes me feel calm, makes me feel rested. Yeah.
I think it's really beautiful too that, and when you were describing kind of where you were in your mind that led up to having this kind of breakthrough of gratitude and appreciation for the beauty that you were sitting in at that moment, is that this poem isn't just this kind of freeze frame of the moment. While it is, it's capturing the kitty sitting, the time of evening that you were there, this kind of perfect temperature. It's also this longer energy of what led up to that and where that kind of comes to this sort of fruition of truth. And so when you read it and you still feel that, I think as listeners and as readers, other people can feel the latitude of that and that longitude rather than just that singular second that you were capturing. So
my heart. Thank you, Megan.
Beautiful. It's really beautiful. Leading into the next poem, actually, I think it's kind of perfect because it doesn't have to be bright and sunny all the time. I think a big thing of celebrating writing is like I said before, honesty and exploration of all kinds of emotions, feelings. And like you said, this came from a kind of dark place, led you to a light place. And I think that contrast of life being light and dark and experiencing all of that, you can't have one without the other, the yin yang of life.
Mm-hmm.
I have a dear friend, Kevin. His name's Kevin Clem. Those who live in the area, you've probably tasted some of his yummy barbecue. It comes from the soul. He's a great chef as well. But he's put so much thought into the things that he writes. He's one of those people that, emits an energy, but he's also honest. There's been good, there's been bad. About a week or so ago, he posted a poem online for his friends and followers to read, and I was blown away. Here's him just recounting his life, essentially. It's essentially a tiny vignette or I guess a series of vignettes of all of his experiences, but it's not all perfect. He talks about some really dark things, and he talks about how extraordinary it is. In fact, he calls this extraordinary life, and it's about his own. So I'm going to go ahead and read, with Kevin's permission, a poem of his. I have lived an extraordinary life. I have fought and loved. I have held the hand of the dying and witnessed the birth of my daughter. I am an artist and a muse, a writer, and a reader. I've been shot at and had a knife pulled on me in anger. I've sat in a darkened movie theater and seen my name on the big screen and in the byline of a book. I can handle a sword or a gun, but choose love over violence. I have broken bread with rich and with the poor. I have kissed a rich man's daughter. I have kissed a stripper. I have drunk expensive scotch in private clubs with rich and powerful men, and drank beer that tastes like piss with the barflies in Hollywood dive bars. I've hung out with the daughter of Elvis and crashed Madonna's private birthday party. I've held a baby tiger in my arms, and those same arms, a year later, held my baby girl. I stood my ground against 4 men with bloodlust in their eyes after the people I was with ran away. The 4 men backed down. I have lived with passion, compassion, love, and light. I have lived an extraordinary life. So, obviously, this is extraordinary. I'm thinking all these things. Wow, you have lived quite the life. But what I like is the duplicity. While these arms have done this great act of self-defense or bravery, still that tender moment of holding a daughter, or the simplicity of hanging out with, people and energy that isn't the most expensive. I think that both obviously have created the entirety of the life story, and it's not just the simple, pretentious explanation of life.
I'm really appreciative that there's no glorification of one over the other, too. I think keeping that equalized shows a really strong sense, at least in this piece, of presence in all of the moments, being rooted and just conscious of that this is something I'm experiencing, and it is beautiful no matter what. Maybe I'm sure some of those stories he found the beauty after the event. Maybe there was some intense parts, but at least in the culmination of this piece, he recognized all of them as part of himself and integrated them in a beautiful way. That's really well done, Kevin.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing again, Kevin. That's Kevin Clem. You can find him at Southern Zen, and you can also see his stuff online.
So let me pull up my last one here. 2 seconds, everybody. Again, Megan, while I'm looking for this last piece here on my phone, you have a book coming out, yes?
I do. So as some of you know, I have several books of my poetry that I've published over the years. It's all been self-published. It's been quite a journey. It's a lot of hard work. Definitely live the classic life of the starving artist, as it were, which I wouldn't change for an instant, because it really is a wonderful thing to create for a living. But I finally did actually get a publishing deal. So I'm going to have a book that's going to be published, and it's not self-published. So
Wow.
It's pretty exciting. There'll be more information about that in the coming months. But again, for those who follow me online and all that, you'll get to see some of that stuff. In the meanwhile, the most exciting thing is I keep writing, and I keep posting writing. So continue to get inspiration from all of these other writers out here, including those on the show and including my wonderful co-host Kevin here. So
And my wonderful co-host Megan. What was your blog site again?
So my blog site is redheadwordsmith.blogspot.com.
Check it out. It's got some good stuff on there.
Thanks, Kev.
So I've got another piece here. We're coming to the end. I'll end with kind of a darker piece, I suppose. This one's called Anxiety Creeps. And in the vein of cathartic healing and writing, this was one where I wanted to kind of embody, or at least pull out my own anxiety and look at what it's doing in my headspace. And so this was kind of a self-preservation piece, I guess. Anxiety creeps. Anxiety creeps and crawls, not like a bug, not like a crawly thing, like a malformed, inappropriate, silent and overwhelming, stinking and festering rot through the veins, seeping and stealing, becoming like an omnipotent, disgusting, twisted, intimate act that neither parties find satiety in.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is a perfect example of how words in and of themselves carry extreme emotion.
Yeah.
And you said dark. Some people might say these are all what we would call negative words, right? They're the unflattering aspects of human emotion.
Yeah.
But sometimes those are the most deeply felt.
And honest, I think.
I felt that in the pit of my solar plexus.
Yeah, sorry to punch everyone out there on that one. Yeah, for me, when I write, I think it's useful to fixate, at least I like to fixate on the topic or the emotion that I'm looking at. And then whatever words kind of pop out is where I start kind of just going with it. And this is one of those.
I would never apologize though. Yeah, don't say sorry about that.
Oh yeah.
It's important that people do write about this, because how many times are we feeling those things and we need somebody else to have said that? And then you can release. It's like an exhale at the end. It's like, oh my gosh, it's building up and here's all this emotion.
That was a Pavlovian response to you. I didn't even realize I said sorry until you said that. I am proud of this piece and I'm proud I wrote it. So there's no apology needed for this, for sure.
Yeah, and people who are out there listening, people who do write or don't write, people who, like I said, I've always told people everyone is a poet. And what I mean by that is you don't have to even get it on paper. If you have thoughts in your mind that you consciously and intentionally sort through and string together, you are creating poetry. The way you choose to view the world and look at the world as all your own, that is poetry. And there's light and there's dark. And I think the big thing about, life is that we all have a shared experience as humans, and what a gift that we have language to,
encourage communication and connection. Yeah. And, now that's escaping me. Value amongst ourselves.
Yeah,
I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, if there's anybody out there who has writing that they want to share, but they haven't felt the courage to, or they don't think it's good enough, or they're not sure if it's something others would understand, we just do encourage you to submit anonymously, even if you'd like. Putting that energy out in the world just encourages others. And I think it's a really, really powerful and beautiful thing. So.
And no one can see you on here. It's quite private. Yeah. We can hear you, but you get to come and just hang out, and it's a celebration. So we're here to celebrate it. Bring anything you want. As I said, even light and dark doesn't have a good and bad morality tie in my head. It's just stuff that we get to discuss and hopefully relate to, because we're all human.
Yeah. So Kevin, you often ask this question to our listeners, and in closing out here in just a few seconds, I just want to ask you any last advice before we say goodbye to anyone out there?
Oh man, I always ask other people, so I don't have to answer this one. For writing, if I had advice for people who are getting into it, for me, at least where I get energy from it, so I guess this is going to be my advice, play with it. I don't think it has to be serious all the time. You can make it serious, but I write, as I said, from a cathartic point for myself first, but I also, very linked close to that secondary, I would say, is I write to see what other people think of it. I like the communal aspect of it. This is something you can both do for yourself, and in the exact same note, share it with someone and see where it hits in their headspace. Words often prompt different definitions in people's heads, and that is probably one of the most exciting things I can say about our communication, is that even as intentional as you can be, someone will surprise you in their interpretation of it. And that is, as Megan said earlier, it's an exploration. It's kind of a journey, and that's why it's important to reread and share different pieces, because you never really know what will come back to you when you put it out there. And I would say almost 100% of the time, it's beautiful, it's encouraging. And if it's not, leave the room, because those people aren't necessary in your life at that point. So walk away from them quickly. But yeah, that's my advice.
Perfect advice. Those that mind don't matter, and those that matter don't mind.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for listening.